So last election cycle, we had a giant surprise of a supposed red wave turning into what I've heard called a red trickle. And so, Dan, we're going to talk about this surprise. What do you think it means for the political landscape? And what does that mean for Christians who are politically motivated and politically involved? How do we interpret these most recent results? And what does it mean for our nation?
Well, I kind of like politics.
Politics is Dan's hobby.
It's my hobby. I'm very ashamed. No, I mean, and so I'm in Colorado where we don't even have good internet access. I didn't have phone coverage.
So you're telling me that they have more pot than the internet over in Colorado?
A lot more pot. I mean, I was so desperate to try to get election results. I went into town. I went to a bar, not to drink, but to try to find. And I couldn't even. They didn't even have them on there. It's so far out in Colorado they don't do politics, I guess. But no. So I finally came back, found an internet that was consistent enough I could get some
dial-up speed.
Yeah. But no, it was surprising to me, and I always swear I won't believe the polls because the polls are so notoriously wrong. But you find yourself getting sucked into it a bit.
Yeah.
I quit trying to prognosticate years ago because I used to be really good at it. Now I'm really, really bad at it, and this would have been another evidence of it. But I think there's some lessons that we should draw. And then I think there's some questions we need to ask ourselves, which is kind of why I wanted to do this episode. The bottom line is we are a deeply divided country. We're divided in multiple ways. We're divided racially. We're divided socioeconomically. We're divided educationally. We're divided in terms of gender. So there were some pretty clear distinctions in some of those. We're also divided geographically, as has been the case. But for the most part of our country, if you live in a city, you're going to vote blue. If you live in a rural suburban, somewhat suburban, but rural area, you're going to vote red. There are two Americas. You can drive across the country and see that. The big blue dots are usually the largest cities and the capital cities and the cities in which major educational institutions reside.
Yeah.
So those tend to be very, very liberal. You see that big map that has all of the red and just these little blue dots everywhere, and they say all of America really is more conservative. Empty land doesn't vote. So you have to look at ones where the population is. And that's and the bottom line is we're very closely divided. We are a 50-50 nation. And because we are a majority rural nation with only two major parties, it doesn't matter whether you win by 0.1% or 20%, your power is, the majority. It lies in the majority.
Yeah.
So what was expected to be historically for a lot of people was supposed to be a red wave really was not. In fact, I would say it was a red spanking. In off-year elections, you anticipate the party that does not have the White House make significant gains, and that's true almost 80% of the time. It's rare that it didn't. This time, it was at best, I think. I mean, the Republicans are barely going to win a majority in the House. It looks like maybe by 2 or 3 seats, but when you have 435 members and many of them are older, that could go away because, 1 or 2 people die a year in Congress. That's not unusual. We had a conservative woman from Indiana just get killed during the election. So these things happen, and when you have a margin that tight, and the other thing is, when you have a margin that tight, it's still hard to get legislation across the finish line because you've always got renegades, particularly in the Republican Party. Republican Party is actually broader in many ways and certainly has less discipline than the Democrat Party. So it's going to be tough to govern at all in the House of Representatives. The Senate is at least going to be 50-50, which is status quo. There's probably a likely chance, a fairly good chance that it's going to be 51-49, which will be interesting. With the Republicans leading the House, there'll be less pressure on the Senate to get rid of the filibuster or to try to do something like pack the Supreme Court. But because it's just not going to be possible with the House being in Republican hands. But at some point, if we see the Senate being firmly in Democrat hands and the House, you could expect those two things to, at least the filibuster issue, to go away, which will not be healthy for the country. And I would say that if the Republicans were thinking it as well. But I think a couple of other things we need to consider is this, that abortion is a bigger deal than we gave it credit for. And I have 2 rants on that. Number one is in our country, young women are angry, particularly young white college-aged women are very angry.
Why is that?
I don't really know. It'd be arrogant, I think, of me to try to give a lot of theories, other than I will say that the American indoctrination system, I mean, educational system, is doing a delightful job of turning out left wing female college graduates.
Mm.
But I would also say that on the other side of it, the National Right to Life organizations have coasted ever since Dobbs. Not coasted, they've disappeared. During this election, there was no defense of a right to life position anywhere nationally.
Hmm.
Individual candidates were left to hang out to dry. And the fact is, this would have been a time for the National Right to Life organization to have been out defending life, to show what abortion was really about, to defend the unborn. And they were absolutely AWOL. And it's very frustrating to me because the press, the media, the activists, the argument was all controlled on those who believe that abortion is morally acceptable. And in doing so, we got taken to the cleaners. We got spanked severely. And when you've got a state like Montana who has a Democrat senator, but he's probably not going to get reelected next time. That is about as Republican a state as you're going to find. And by a 51-49 majority, they voted that you cannot even intervene in the life of a baby that was accidentally born during an abortion, in which is of a survivable state. You can't even intervene. You got to let them die in the metal pan that they place the body in. There's something broken in our defense of life if we're not making a case that is anything less than infanticide. So that was a frustrating thing. I think also when you look at what happened in Florida with Ron DeSantis, the emergence of DeSantis as a viable national candidate is without question at this point. And that's really going to turn the next election into something interesting. When we're recording this is a Wednesday. Last night, Donald Trump announced that he's running for president.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I wanted to emphasize in kind of a post-election analysis was that this is going to be a call to reckoning for evangelicals. I've made no secret. Anybody knows me well knows I am not a Trump fan. Never
Really?
have been.
I've never heard that before.
I've lost friends for of decades because I'm not a Trump fan and refuse to vote for him and different things. I do not believe him to be a conservative. I believe him to be a pragmatic populist who is a narcissistic egotist. And as a result, I just don't trust him. And I will give credit that he surrounded himself with conservative people. They got a lot of good things accomplished that I agreed with. I particularly agreed with what they did in the court system. However, that had very little to do with Donald Trump and had a lot to do with Mitch McConnell. But in the end, I believe there's now a day of reckoning where the evangelical movement that has largely aligned itself first with the Republicans. By the way, I'm a registered independent. I'm neither Republican or Democrat, but obviously my values probably are more Republican than Democrat simply because I'm so pro-life. But they have aligned themselves, first of all, with the Republican Party, but secondly, very heavily with Donald Trump, much to my chagrin, very much with Donald Trump. Now, the argument that they've made is when given a choice between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, between someone who is at least verbally pro-life versus someone who is adamantly pro-abortion, and all the other things, the LGBTQT, the woke culture, the CRT, all the other things that divide the two parties, it is easy for us to align ourselves with someone who is morally flawed, but politically more in tune with evangelical Christian values. But now, as we enter into another election cycle, that is not the case. So the question is, will evangelicals, the 40% of the GOP that identifies themselves as evangelical Republicans, will they now continue to support a morally flawed candidate who used to be president and who has, at arguably best, a personality cult that surrounds him, largely led by many prominent evangelicals.
Yeah.
Will they continue to follow him, or will they then say, we have discernment and character, and morality does matter, and will they choose a different candidate to support, at least in the primaries leading up to the next general election? Will they get behind a Catholic like DeSantis? Will they get behind an evangelical like Ted Cruz? Or will they get behind someone like a Tim Scott or a Nikki Haley from South Carolina? Or will they continue to march faithfully in loyalty to someone who is morally reprehensible, who really has some of the worst character we've ever observed in a chief executive of the nation, and continue to blindly support him? It'll be very interesting to see how this plays out.
So you said a lot there.
11 minutes. 11 minutes of diatribe.
Dan had a lot on his chest today that he wanted to get off, and
But I feel so much better.
How do you think, as Christians right now? I want to revisit the Trump thing, but first I want to ask you, just as a Christian, when you saw there's a way to look at this politically, right? But there's also a lens of, okay, seeing God's sovereign. I mean, you preached a great sermon on Daniel chapter 8. I know I've preached something very similar in Daniel chapter 7. Like, there's the idea that God is ruling and reigning, right? That he's sovereign, he's in control. What does it make you think? What does it make you question about what God is doing in our nation when you see what happens? Is there a spiritual lens to see these kinds of things? What does it mean for the church?
Yeah, I believe this. I believe the American church needs to brace itself. And I believe there's coming a time of purification for the church that will take the form of at least some level of persecution. But before persecution will come opposition that could lead to persecution. Yeah. I don't know that it'll necessarily be in my lifetime. But I do think, the pendulums tend to swing, and right now it hasn't been swinging, and that's very surprising. But I think a large part of that is because Trump was such an overpowering force in the nation, creates such strong emotion, both pro and con, that it is kind of disrupted. I mean, he's, in leadership, there are disruptive leaders that just kind of come in and break everything, and then you rebuild it. He's very definitely a disruptor. But eventually disruptors are bad governors, so to speak. So I don't think he's reelectable, first of all. And I think that his days are numbered, first of all, because the man's almost 80 years old. But what emerges out of the Republican Party in terms of leader, and also out of the Democrat Party, because, again, Biden's 80 years old. So assuming he does run for re-election, even if he gets re-elected, in 4-6 years, there's going to be a new leader of the Republican Party, or Democratic Party, and the Republican Party. That's when things will really clarify as to the next generation of leadership. Yeah. And we're so closely divided, I don't know which way it's going to go. Yeah. But because conservative people tend to be older and liberal people tend to be conservative, I would say it's more likely to go liberal. I'm sorry, younger people are more conservative, or liberal. So I think it is more likely to go liberal. And I think we're going to have to realize that our faith needs not to be supported by the fact of our government, but by our God. Yeah. Are you living your faith out because it's convenient and easy because we live in a free country and an incredibly free system? Or do you really believe this stuff? Yeah. And I think that is a day of reckoning coming for us. And I think it's a question we ought to go ahead and wrestle through right now, because I think there's a lot of people who are practicing their faith in convenience instead of conviction.
Yeah, I think there is something that, as I watched the returns a few Tuesdays ago, man, I was shocked, because everything that people were saying was red wave. It felt like there was this momentum, and then it was just like, what happened? It felt like what the Democrats went through in 2016 is what Republicans went through. 6 years later, like, what just happened? Where did all these people come from? And there's a lot of trying to figure it out. And again, I haven't listened to a lot of pollsters. I haven't listened to a lot of analysis of what's going on. I just know what has happened. And the way I look at it, I share a lot of your perspective. I think the thing also I see is there is so much, the the world in which we are growing up in, I've said this before, doing this Babylon series, Thriving in Babylon, but we're not in Kansas anymore.
Mm-mm.
The things that the Judeo-Christian ethics that we have, that traditionally have been central and promoted in the American culture for 300 plus years, even before we were a nation, is eroding rapidly. The things that we used to all think that everyone cared about, now that percentage is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. In secular humanism, the woke socialism or Marxism, whatever you want to call it, is really becoming the new religion. And that's the way I see it, is this LGBTQ woke Marxism. It's now viewed as a religion in a way by many young people, because there's this void of God in their life. And so they've supplanted it. So we're not just talking political ideology. This is what I'm trying to say. We're not just talking about simply political ideology now. We're talking about two distinct religions that are growing. One is shrinking and one is growing. And that's what we're dealing with right now.
And something that's missing is, you would anticipate in the transition period, when a culture shifts, that there is a period of apathy toward the former, and then it reaches more of a hostility. We have moved directly from an embracement past apathy to an antagonism.
Yeah.
There's an antagonism.
Yes.
You're haters. You're not just morally neutral. If you believe in biblical values, you're a hater.
That's right.
You're an enemy. You're a threat to democracy. The kind of rhetoric coming out of that is quite stunning. I think there's something else that we need to throw a caution flag out on the field for both liberals and conservatives. And I understand I've got believing friends who are more politically liberal than me, but I think both of those, we're the way the media is constructed right now, we tend to find ourselves in this communication vacuum where we only listen to people who share our values. So the people who were most shocked this year were people who get all their news from Fox News. Because if you watch Fox News, everything was red wave. This is going to be huge. We're going to take out people that have been here for, and it didn't happen. But in 2016, if you remember watching the election results come in over on CNN and MSNBC and the mainstream NBC, ABC, CBS, those people, they were absolutely shocked. The looks on their faces could not be denied because they listened to all their friends, and the media is largely controlled by liberals. I was listening to an interview yesterday about a guy who was watching the results come in as a conservative commentator at, I think it was NBC or CBS, and he said every time that a Democrat would win, everybody in the newsroom would applaud. It wasn't on camera. Nobody could hear it out in the real, but that shows a level of bias. And by the way, the same thing would have happened on the Republican side in Fox News. But most of us tend to only listen to messages that are reinforcing our and I think that's dangerous. It's one of the reasons why I sometimes listen to NPR, which I hate, but I listen to them. I want to know how the other side thinks because I have a responsibility to be able to communicate and listen to them. And herein lies, I think, and this is something that you've really been good, Ben, with reminding me often, is we have a responsibility to know how people think who are not like us, because we're supposed to be reaching them with the gospel.
Right. Yeah.
And, while I have strong political beliefs, they're not more important to me than my spiritual beliefs.
That's right.
And when I can no longer communicate civilly and kindly to people who see things differently than me, then I've got a spiritual problem I need to address, because my witness is far more important. It should be far more important
That's right.
than my political stance.
100%. And I think that's what really the challenge for us as Christians moving forward is, we don't want people to view the faith, the Christian faith, through a political lens. And that's going to be a really hard thing to do moving forward in our nation, knowing that so many evangelicals are seen as almost identical to a Republican. Yeah. And so those are things that's an issue we're going to have to navigate. All right, so we've got 2 minutes left. What do you think? I mean, the whole Donald Trump thing he's the elephant in the room, No
pun intended.
No pun intended. Do you think, we know how you feel, you talk, there's no one that doesn't have a moderate view of Donald Trump.
Right. You either love him or hate him.
You love him or hate him. Christians love him or hate him. Right? I mean, there's
for the most part, yeah, absolutely.
Right? What do you think? is going. I just want to hear from you. What do you think is going to happen? This is just pure Dan opinion right
Here's
now.
what I fear is going to happen. I fear that within the Republican base, that you will have him running against a mix of people running from DeSantis to Larry Hogan out of Maryland,
Right.
who would be I would call him a liberal Republican. Others
Yeah.
would call him a moderate. But and so you're going to have 8, 10, 12 egos, and they're all got egos. They wouldn't be running for president if they didn't. And Donald Trump. Well, Donald Trump, he's got 30, 40% of the overall population that would vote for him over Jesus. I honestly
I
think.
believe that too. There is true occult.
So if that's 30 or 40% nationally, then probably he's got 60, 70% Republicans. But assuming he only's got 50% of Republicans that are going to vote for him, you take the 50% he gets and you divide the other 50% among 12 egos, and they're going to be getting 10, 12. DeSantis may get 25 or 30%.
Yeah.
But if these guys stay in real long, then Trump is going to be your nominee. And I do not believe that Trump is capable of winning the general election, or he'd be president today.
Right.
Here's my other concern. My other concern is, let's say that a big something, revelation comes and DeSantis wins or Cruz wins or Scott or Haley or somebody wins and Trump doesn't. I do not believe that Trump has the character or a sense of patriotism, perhaps, or statesmanship that would say, I'm going to get behind the winner.
Yeah.
I'm afraid what he will do
agree.
is he'll do a Ross Perot thing, and he'll split the conservative vote, and then not only will the Democrat go easily into the White House, but he's going to sweep a lot of others in, and we're going to have 4 years of really powerful left-wing leadership in this country, which I, in my political view, would not be good for the country.
Right. Yeah.
At the same time, I want to say this, and this is what Daniel 7 and 8 that you and I just taught is, if that happens, that's God, and we got to accept that. We can't quit. We can't give up. We can't go run into a cave and hide. We have to occupy till Christ comes. And that's why, while I love politics as a spectator sport, I don't let it depress me. I don't let it make me, crawl in a hole and want to die. I don't obsess about it. I slept fine the election night, and I will sleep as fine as I do any night, I guess, in light of that, because we really must trust God.
It's fun to have these kind of conversations because, we don't talk about politics a lot. But when something like this happens, it is good to take a step back and think through it. And what are the ramifications of us as followers of Jesus? And listen, we're just two guys that have opinions, and I'm sure there's a lot more opinions in our church. We're not infallible when it comes to politics, but I do think that there is something going on in our nation that there's a shift taking place. And I believe in order for there to be a shift in the right direction, it's going to have to come from the Spirit of God bringing a movement of revival.
The most patriotic thing you and I will do is to find somebody who's far from God but close to us and share with them the journey of faith.
Yeah, I mean, to see our nation change, it's not going to happen through voting. It's just not.
It's not.
So, all right, thank you so much for listening to this conversation about the most recent election. I hope it's encouraged you, maybe challenged you a little bit. And as always, please share this with your friends, people that might be interested in these kinds of conversations. Thanks again for joining us at Life Talks. We'll talk to you next time. So last Tuesday was a massive surprise and shock to most political pundits.
No, last Tuesday was yesterday.
What do you mean?
Today's Wednesday.
Okay, fine.
It'll be like 2 Tuesdays ago.
Okay. I'll restate my date.
You should just leave all of this in.
Okay.